I'm Sarah, 26, and I just discovered my parents would rather destroy me than lose their precious daughter Emma. Last Tuesday, they served me legal papers demanding I donate my kidney to my younger sister, the same sister they've worshipped while treating me like hired help my entire life. But here's what they didn't expect. I said no. And when they threatened to sue me for abandoning family responsibility, I uncovered a truth so devastating it shattered everything I believed about blood, loyalty, and the family that never truly wanted me. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on the people who gave me life but never gave me love, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you've ever felt like the family scapegoat, and subscribe because this story gets wild. We're talking courtroom drama, buried secrets, and the kind of karma that makes you believe in cosmic justice. Trust me, you won't see this ending coming. Growing up in the Morrison household meant understanding your place in the hierarchy. Emma was the son, beautiful, talented, destined for greatness. Mom and Dad orbited around her every need, every dream, every minor inconvenience. And me? I was the moon, only visible when reflecting Emma's light, only valued for what I could provide. Emma was born when I was 3, and from that moment, I became invisible. She got piano lessons while I did chores. She received college funds while I worked 2 jobs to pay for community college. When she wanted to pursue art in New York, they mortgaged the house. When I graduated nursing school, they forgot to come to the ceremony. The favoritism was so blatant that neighbors noticed. Teachers asked if I was okay. But whenever I brought it up, Mom would get that wounded look and Dad would lecture me about jealousy being ugly. Emma needs more attention because she's special, Mom would say. You're strong, Sarah. You don't need us like she does. I believed that lie for 23 years. 2 months ago, Emma collapsed during one of her gallery showings in Manhattan. The diagnosis came swift and brutal: kidney failure, genetic condition, immediate need for transplant. Suddenly, my phone was ringing nonstop. Sarah, honey, we need you to come home immediately, Mom's voice was shaking. Emma's sick, and the doctors say family matches are the best option. I dropped everything. Flew home from Seattle, where I'd been working as a trauma nurse, building a life far from their toxic dynamic. Because despite everything, Emma was my sister, and I couldn't let her die. The testing process took 2 weeks. I was a perfect match. The doctors explained the surgery, the risks, the recovery time. I said yes without hesitation, watching the relief flood my parents' faces for the first time in my adult life. But then something shifted. Of course, you'll need to take extended leave from your job, Dad announced during a family dinner. Emma will need care during recovery, and you're the only one qualified. The surgery is scheduled for next month, Mom added, not looking at me. Dr. Peterson says Emma should make a full recovery with your kidney. You're saving her life, Sarah. Finally doing something meaningful. Finally. Doing something meaningful. The words hit like a physical blow, but I swallowed my hurt. This was about saving Emma's life, not settling old scores. Then I overheard the phone call. I'd come back early from a pre-op appointment, walking through the front door as Mom was talking to someone in the kitchen. Her voice carried that particular tone she used when discussing important matters, the tone she'd never used when talking about my achievements. No, the nurse said the match is perfect. Sarah's kidney will give Emma decades of healthy life. A pause. Oh, she agreed immediately. She's always been so devoted to Emma. Really, it's the least she can do after everything. I froze in the hallway. What do you mean? Mom continued. Well, of course we'll need to discuss Sarah's future after the surgery. She can't keep gallivanting around the country when Emma needs family support. This is her chance to finally contribute something valuable to this family. My blood turned to ice. The inheritance? Oh, Richard and I already decided. Emma will need financial security for her medical care. Sarah is giving her kidney. That's her contribution. Emma shouldn't have to worry about money on top of her health. I stood there, invisible in my own childhood home, listening to my mother discuss my future like I was a commodity. Like my kidney was rent payment for a lifetime of emotional neglect. But the worst was yet to come. Sarah doesn't know yet, but we're hoping she'll move back permanently. Emma will need a caretaker who understands her condition, and Sarah's medical training makes her perfect for the role. Really, it's what she's been preparing for her whole life without realizing it. The conversation continued, each word a nail in the coffin of any remaining illusions I had about my parents' love. They weren't just taking my kidney. They were planning to take my life, my independence, my future, all to serve Emma's needs. I backed out of the house silently, sitting in my rental car for an hour as the full scope of their manipulation sank in. This wasn't about family love or sisterly devotion. This was about reducing me to a walking spare parts depot and unpaid caretaker for their precious daughter. That night, I called the transplant coordinator and withdrew my consent. The explosion was immediate and nuclear. Dad's face turned purple when I told them. "You can't do this. Emma will die without that kidney." "There are other donors," I said quietly. "She's on the list. Other donors could take years." Mom was screaming now, something I'd rarely seen. "You're her sister. You have a responsibility." Where was that responsibility when I needed support for college? When I graduated nursing school? When I got promoted to trauma unit supervisor? My voice remained steady even as my heart shattered. "You've made it clear my only value to this family is what I can provide, Emma. I'm done being your backup plan." Emma sat silent through most of the fight, but her final words cut deepest. "I always knew you were selfish, Sarah. But I never thought you'd let me die out of jealousy." 3 days later, the legal papers arrived. The lawsuit was breathtaking in its audacity. My parents were suing me for breach of familial duty, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and abandonment of medical commitment. Their lawyer, a family friend who'd attended Emma's birthday parties, was seeking court-ordered medical intervention to force the kidney donation. I read the papers 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of cruelty. They'd documented every conversation about the surgery, twisted my initial consent into a binding family contract. They'd even included testimony from relatives about my jealousy toward Emma and my history of attention-seeking behavior. But the most devastating section was Mom's sworn statement. "Sarah has always resented Emma's achievements and opportunities. This refusal is not about medical concerns, but about punishing our family for not centering Sarah's needs above her sick sister's survival." Sitting in my Seattle apartment, papers scattered across my kitchen table, I felt something inside me crystallize. Not anger. Anger was too hot, too chaotic for what I was feeling. This was something colder, cleaner. This was clarity. I'd spent 26 years trying to earn love from people who viewed me as a supporting character in Emma's story. Even now, facing their daughter's potential death, they couldn't see me as anything more than a resource to be exploited. Fine. If they wanted to treat me like an enemy, I'd show them what an enemy could do. My first call was to Rebecca Martinez, the best litigation attorney in Seattle. I'd met her during a medical malpractice case where I'd testified as an expert witness. She was sharp, ruthless, and had a particular hatred for family manipulation. "They're suing you to force organ donation?" Rebecca's voice crackled through the phone. "Sarah, this is legally absurd and morally reprehensible. No court in America will order forced medical procedures." "I know the lawsuit won't hold up," I said. "But I want to understand why they think it will. There's something I'm missing." Rebecca agreed to take the case, and her investigation began immediately. While she worked on the legal angles, I started my own digging into the Morrison family finances and history. What I found in the first week made me sick. Emma's medical bills weren't being covered by insurance as fully as my parents claimed. The experimental treatments, the private specialists, the extended hospital stays, they were burning through money at an alarming rate. The house was already mortgaged to the limit. Dad's business was hemorrhaging cash, partly from the economy but mostly from his tendency to prioritize Emma's needs over actual business operations. But there was more. Much more. I hired a private investigator, a former cop named Marcus Chin who specialized in family fraud cases. What Marcus uncovered over the next 2 weeks systematically destroyed every assumption I'd held about my family's dynamics. The first bombshell, Emma's trust fund, the one supposedly funded by years of careful saving and grandparent contributions, had been emptied. Not for medical bills, but for her lifestyle. The New York apartment, the art studio, the European trips. All funded by money that should have been invested conservatively. My parents had been liquidating everything to maintain Emma's expensive tastes while telling me there was no money for my education. The second revelation was worse. Remember how I'd worked 2 jobs to pay for community college while Emma got a free ride to art school? Those weren't Emma's savings paying for her education. That was my college fund. The one my grandparents had specifically established for me, which my parents had redirected without my knowledge. But Marcus's third discovery made me physically ill. My grandmother's will, probated when I was 16, had left her house and a substantial investment portfolio split equally between Emma and me. I'd never seen a penny of that inheritance. My parents had convinced me that Grandma Rose had left everything to Emma because Sarah was too young to handle money responsibly. They'd stolen my inheritance. For 10 years, they'd been living off money meant for both daughters while telling me I was lucky they kept a roof over my head. The paper trail Marcus uncovered showed systematic financial abuse spanning over a decade. They'd opened credit cards in my name when I turned 18, running up debt that explained my mysteriously terrible credit score. They'd claimed me as a dependent on their taxes long after I'd moved out, stealing thousands in refunds. They'd even forged my signature on loan documents, using my nursing degree and income potential as collateral for loans that funded Emma's lifestyle. By week 3 of Marcus's investigation, I was staring at evidence of financial crimes that could send my parents to prison. But the discovery that broke me was personal. Hidden in Dad's office files, Marcus found a folder labeled Sarah, Medical History. Inside were documents I'd never seen. Psychological evaluations from when I was a child, all suggesting I had attention-seeking tendencies and jealousy-based behavioral issues. Reports from teachers noting my withdrawal and sullen demeanor that my parents had reframed as evidence of my problematic personality. But most damaging was a letter from my high school guidance counselor, strongly recommending family therapy after I'd confided in her about feeling invisible at home. The counselor had specifically noted signs of emotional neglect and suggested that my parents' extreme favoritism toward Emma was creating an unhealthy family dynamic. My parents had hidden this letter for 8 years, dismissing professional concerns about their treatment of me while continuing to blame my emotional struggles on personal defects. Reading that letter in Marcus's office, I finally understood the scope of their gaslighting. Every time I'd questioned the family dynamics, every time I'd expressed hurt about their favoritism, they'd made me feel crazy for noticing patterns that were obvious to outside observers. They hadn't just stolen my money. They'd stolen my reality. That night, Rebecca called with her own discovery. "Sarah, I've been digging into why your parents think this lawsuit could work, and I found something interesting. They've been telling people, relatives, family, friends, even Emma's medical team, that you already signed legal documents promising the kidney donation. I never signed anything except the initial testing consent forms. I know. But they've created a narrative where backing out makes you legally liable. They're essentially trying to fraud their way into forced medical compliance. Can they do that? Absolutely not. But Sarah, this goes deeper than legal malpractice. They're committing fraud, forgery, and possibly medical coercion. If we can prove they forged documents or misrepresented your consent, this becomes a criminal matter." As I hung up, I realized my parents had made a crucial error. They'd escalated a family dispute into criminal behavior, and they'd done it assuming I'd never fight back because I'd never fought back before. They were about to learn how much I'd changed since moving away from their toxic influence. The transformation began the moment I decided to stop defending and start attacking. For the first time in my life, I had allies who saw my parents clearly instead of through the fog of family mythology. Rebecca was building a legal strategy that would make my parents regret ever involving lawyers. Marcus had uncovered enough financial crimes to fill a federal prosecutor's wet dreams. But I needed something more personal, something that would expose the 26-year lie about who was really the problem in the Morrison family. That's when I remembered my cousin Jake. Jake was Dad's nephew, 3 years older than me, who'd always been the family truth-teller. He'd tried to warn me about Emma's manipulative tendencies when we were teenagers, but I'd been too desperate for family acceptance to listen. If anyone had witnessed my parents' true behavior over the years, it would be Jake. I called him from Seattle, not sure what reception I'd get. The Morrison family loyalty ran deep, and blood was supposed to be thicker than justice. Sarah? Jake's voice was surprised but warm. I heard about the lawsuit. That's some serious bullshit, even for Uncle Richard and Aunt Patricia. Relief flooded through me. You know about the kidney situation? Know about it? I've been watching Mom and Dad argue about whether to say something for weeks. Sarah, what your parents are doing is insane. Nobody should be forced to donate organs, especially not through legal coercion. Jake agreed to meet me in person, and when he flew to Seattle 2 days later, he brought something I hadn't expected: documentation. I've been keeping records, he said, spreading photos and notes across my coffee table. Not deliberately at first, but after watching how they treated you versus Emma for years, I started paying attention. The evidence was damning. Jake had photos from family gatherings showing the obvious disparities: Emma opening expensive presents while I got practical gifts, Emma being celebrated while my achievements were barely acknowledged, Emma surrounded by relatives while I sat alone. But more valuable were his written records of conversations. Jake had documented years of my parents' private comments about me, how I was difficult and ungrateful, how Emma was their real investment, how they planned to ensure Emma's financial security while assuming I'd figure it out on my own. The worst was last Christmas, Jake said, showing me his phone notes. Your dad actually said, Sarah's strong enough to handle disappointment. Emma breaks easily, so we have to be more careful with her. Like emotional neglect was character building for you, but potentially damaging for Emma. Having this external validation was like oxygen after years of suffocating on gaslighting. Jake's records proved I hadn't imagined the disparate treatment, hadn't been too sensitive or jealous. The favoritism had been real and systematic. There's something else, Jake said hesitantly. About Emma's kidney failure. The family knows something you don't. My blood chilled. What do you mean? The genetic condition? It's not genetic, Sarah. Emma's kidney problems are from drug use. Cocaine, specifically, over several years. Your parents have been covering it up, paying for private doctors who'd treat the symptoms without reporting the cause. The room spun around me. Emma's kidney failure, the crisis that had brought me rushing home, wasn't a tragic twist of fate. It was the consequence of choices she'd made while living off stolen inheritance money in her Manhattan art scene. They know you'd never donate if you knew the truth, Jake continued. So they created this narrative about genetic conditions and family duty. Sarah, they've been lying about everything. I called Rebecca immediately, adding this information to our growing file. Drug-induced organ failure changed everything about the medical ethics of donation. Doctors had a responsibility to inform potential donors about the underlying cause of organ damage, especially when it involved substance abuse with high recurrence rates. If they've been hiding this from the medical team, we're looking at medical fraud, Rebecca said. And if they've been lying to you about the cause while pressuring you for donation, that's coercion under false pretenses. While Rebecca pursued the medical fraud angle, I reached out to someone else who could provide crucial testimony: my former colleague David Kim, a social worker who specialized in family dynamics and manipulation. David and I had worked together on several cases involving medical decisions and family pressure. When I explained my situation, his assessment was immediate and professional. Sarah, what you're describing is classic parentification combined with systematic emotional abuse. They've conditioned you to believe your value comes from serving Emma's needs, then escalated to legal coercion when that conditioning failed. David agreed to provide expert testimony about the psychological manipulation if the case went to trial. But more importantly, he helped me understand the full scope of what had been done to me. This isn't just favoritism, he explained during our video call. This is a family system where you are assigned the role of Emma's caretaker and support system from childhood. Your parents didn't fail to love you equally. They actively trained you to sacrifice yourself for Emma's benefit. The psychological framework helped everything click into place. My choice to pursue nursing, my tendency to prioritize others' needs, my deep-seated belief that love had to be earned through service, all of it had been shaped by 26 years of conditioning. But understanding the manipulation also revealed its weakness. My parents' lawsuit was based on the assumption that I'd eventually cave to family pressure, as I'd done my entire life. They couldn't conceive of a world where I'd fight back with equal force. They were about to get educated. Meanwhile, Marcus's investigation had expanded beyond financial fraud into something more sinister. Following the money trail of my stolen inheritance, he'd uncovered evidence that my parents had been planning this kidney scenario for months, possibly years. Your parents have been consulting with lawyers about organ donation laws for over a year, Marcus reported. Long before Emma's diagnosis. They've been researching legal precedents for family obligation in medical decisions. You're saying they planned this? I'm saying they've been preparing for the possibility. Look at this. Marcus showed me printed emails from my father's computer. These go back 18 months, all about legal ways to compel family members into medical procedures. The emails painted a picture of calculated manipulation. My parents hadn't been driven to legal action by desperation over Emma's sudden illness. They'd been building a legal strategy to force my compliance long before the crisis occurred. One email chain was particularly chilling. Dad had been corresponding with a lawyer about creating family medical contracts that could be used to establish legal obligation for organ donation between siblings. The lawyer had advised that such contracts were unenforceable, but Dad had persisted, asking about alternative approaches. They've been planning to harvest your kidney for over a year, Marcus said bluntly. This wasn't a desperate reaction to Emma's illness. This was a calculated plan to acquire your organs through legal coercion. Armed with this evidence, Rebecca filed a countersuit that turned my parents' legal strategy into a weapon against them. We sued for financial fraud, emotional abuse, attempted medical coercion, and theft of inheritance. But the most devastating charge was conspiracy to commit medical fraud through misrepresentation of Emma's condition. The media attention was immediate and brutal for my parents. Local parents sue daughter for kidney donation was bad enough, but parents caught hiding daughter's drug use while demanding sister's kidney destroyed any public sympathy they might have had. Emma's response to the media coverage revealed everything about her character. Instead of acknowledging her substance abuse or apologizing for the family's deception, she released a statement calling me vindictive and claiming I was using legal technicalities to avoid family responsibility. That statement was her biggest mistake. By confirming that she knew about the deception while continuing to demand my kidney, Emma eliminated any possibility that she was an innocent victim of our parents' manipulation. She'd been a willing participant in the fraud. The family united against me, as expected. Relatives who'd watched my mistreatment for years suddenly emerged to defend my parents, desperate attempt to save their daughter. The Morrison family mythology machine cranked into high gear, painting me as the ungrateful daughter who'd turned against blood loyalty. But I wasn't alone anymore. Jake publicly supported my decision, providing testimony that split the extended family. David's professional assessment of the psychological abuse garnered media attention from experts who recognized the pattern. Most importantly, Rebecca's legal strategy was working. The court refused to grant any emergency orders for forced medical procedures. Instead, they ordered investigation into the financial fraud claims and medical misrepresentation. My parents' lawsuit was falling apart while mine gained momentum. As spring turned to summer, I watched my parents' world crumble from my Seattle apartment, feeling something I'd never experienced before: the power of fighting back. But the real reckoning was still coming, and when it arrived, it would exceed even my wildest expectations for justice. The courtroom showdown came in late July, and my parents had no idea what was waiting for them. They'd spent months doubling down on their victim narrative, painting themselves as desperate parents fighting for their daughter's life against a selfish sister's cruelty. Emma had given tearful interviews about family loyalty and the pain of betrayal. Dad had taken out a second mortgage to pay for aggressive legal representation. They walked into that courthouse believing they were fighting for Emma's survival. They walked out facing federal charges. Rebecca had spent 3 months building our case like a prosecutor preparing for a murder trial. Every financial transaction, every forged document, every instance of fraud was meticulously documented. But the nuclear bomb she'd prepared was something none of us had expected: Emma's medical records from her private Manhattan clinic. "Your Honor," Rebecca addressed the judge, "the plaintiffs have based their entire case on the premise that Ms. Morrison has a moral and legal obligation to save her sister's life from a tragic genetic condition. However, the defendant's kidney failure was not caused by genetic factors, but by chronic cocaine abuse spanning 4 years." The courtroom erupted. My parents' lawyer jumped up with objections, but Rebecca was ready. Furthermore, the plaintiffs have systematically defrauded the defendant of over $200,000 in inheritance money, forged financial documents in her name, and attempted to coerce organ donation through deliberate medical misrepresentation. This is not a family dispute. This is organized fraud with the victim's organs as the end goal. Emma's face went white as Rebecca displayed the medical records on screen. For years of documented cocaine use, multiple warnings from doctors about kidney damage, treatment programs Emma had abandoned, and most damning, text messages between Emma and her dealer discussing payment for drugs with family money. But the evidence that destroyed my parents was the email chain Marcus had uncovered. Rebecca read aloud Dad's communications with lawyers, dating back over a year, discussing strategies to legally force my kidney donation. The premeditation was undeniable. "This family didn't turn to legal action out of desperation," Rebecca stated. "They've been planning to harvest their older daughter's organs through legal coercion for over 18 months, while simultaneously stealing her inheritance to fund the lifestyle that caused their younger daughter's organ failure." My parents' lawyer tried to salvage something, arguing that regardless of Emma's drug use, I still had a moral obligation as her sister. It was the wrong move. Jake took the stand as our character witness, and his testimony was devastating. 20 years of documented favoritism, financial abuse, and emotional neglect. He had recordings, actual audio recordings from family gatherings where my parents discussed their plans for my future as Emma's caretaker and financial support system. They never saw Sarah as a daughter, Jake testified. She was Emma's support staff. Her college fund became Emma's art school tuition. Her inheritance became Emma's Manhattan lifestyle. And now her kidney was supposed to become Emma's salvation from the consequences of drug addiction funded by stolen money. But the moment that broke the case wide open was when David Kim took the stand as our expert witness. His psychological analysis of the family dynamic was so precise, so damning, that even Emma started crying. The Morrison family system is a textbook case of parentification and systematic emotional abuse, David explained. Sarah was conditioned from childhood to believe her worth depended on serving Emma's needs. This lawsuit represents the ultimate escalation of that abuse: legal coercion to force organ donation while hiding the true cause of the organ failure. The judge's decision was swift and brutal. Not only did she dismiss my parents' lawsuit with prejudice, she referred the case to the district attorney for prosecution of financial fraud, medical coercion, and conspiracy charges. But Emma's reaction in the courtroom revealed the depths of her entitlement. As the judge read the decision, Emma stood up and screamed at me, "You're killing me." All of this is just revenge because Mom and Dad love me more. You'd rather let me die than admit you've always been jealous. Her outburst was caught on video and went viral within hours. The image of Emma Morrison, revealed drug addict and beneficiary of systematic family fraud, screaming about being loved more while her sister faced years of financial abuse, became a meme about entitled family members. The federal prosecutor who took the case was Sarah Chin, no relation to my private investigator Marcus, but equally thorough in her approach to family fraud cases. Within 2 weeks, she'd filed formal charges against both parents for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit medical coercion. Emma faced her own charges for participating in the fraud, particularly her role in accessing and spending my inheritance money while knowing it wasn't legally hers. But the final blow came from an unexpected source, the Medical Ethics Board. Dr. Peterson, Emma's nephrologist, had been kept in the dark about Emma's drug use and the family's coercion tactics. When the truth emerged during the trial, he filed a complaint with the state medical board about my parents' interference with informed consent protocols. The board's investigation revealed that my parents had actively misled multiple medical professionals about Emma's condition, my willingness to donate, and the family dynamics affecting the decision. They'd even forged documents suggesting I'd already committed to the surgery when I was still in the testing phase. 3 months after the courthouse showdown, the consequences were rolling in like an avalanche. Dad's business collapsed under the weight of legal fees and federal investigation. The IRS opened their own probe into years of fraudulent tax filings claiming me as a dependent. Mom's social standing in their small town evaporated when local newspapers covered the trial details. But Emma's fate was the most dramatic. With her drug use exposed and her family's fraud scheme public knowledge, her art career imploded. Galleries that had showcased her work quietly removed her pieces. The Manhattan apartment she couldn't afford without stolen money was foreclosed on. She was forced to enter a court-mandated rehabilitation program while facing federal charges. The irony was perfect. Emma, who'd spent years living off my stolen inheritance while I worked multiple jobs, was now dependent on court-appointed services while I thrived in my Seattle career. But the sweetest justice was personal. The family members who'd rallied to support my parents during the lawsuit began changing their tune as the evidence mounted. Aunts and uncles who'd criticized my selfishness started reaching out with apologies and their own stories about witnessing my mistreatment over the years. The Morrison family mythology finally cracked under the weight of documented truth. The federal convictions came down like dominoes over the following 8 months, each one more satisfying than the last. Dad was sentenced to 3 years for financial fraud and identity theft. The judge specifically noted his systematic exploitation of his daughter's trust and identity for personal gain, adding extra time for the premeditated nature of the crimes. Watching him led away in handcuffs while Mom sobbed in the gallery was a moment I'd dreamed about but never thought I'd witness. Mom received 2 years for conspiracy and aiding in financial fraud. Her sentencing hearing was particularly brutal because she tried to play the desperate mother card with a judge who'd read every detail of my childhood emotional abuse. Mrs. Morrison, Judge Williams stated, "Your actions represent a fundamental betrayal of parental duty that went far beyond the current crisis." But Emma's downfall was the most spectacular to watch unfold. Her federal charges resulted in 18 months in minimum security prison, but the real punishment was the complete destruction of her carefully crafted identity. The art world is small and gossipy, and news of her drug-fueled kidney failure funded by stolen inheritance money spread through galleries and social media like wildfire. The hashtag #Emmagate became shorthand for entitled family members who destroy themselves through their own choices while blaming others for the consequences. Art bloggers wrote think pieces about privilege and accountability. Her former gallery friends posted Instagram stories, distancing themselves from her toxic behavior. Most devastating was when her ex-boyfriend Marcus, Yes, another Marcus, the pretentious sculptor she'd dated in Manhattan, sold his story to a gossip blog. He revealed years of Emma's drug use, her constant financial crises solved by family money, and her private admissions that she'd always known her parents favored her unfairly but felt entitled to the treatment. Emma always said Sarah was jealous and needed to get over it, Marcus told the interviewer. She knew her parents treated Sarah badly, but she thought Sarah deserved it for not being special enough. When the kidney thing started, Emma actually laughed about how Sarah would finally be useful for something. That quote haunted Emma through her entire prison sentence and beyond. It perfectly captured the callous entitlement that had driven our family's dysfunction for 26 years. Meanwhile, the financial restitution process was revealing the full scope of my parents' theft. Court-ordered forensic accountants uncovered fraud dating back to when I was 16. A decade of systematic theft that totaled over $400,000 when interest and penalties were calculated. The family home was sold to pay restitution. Dad's business assets were liquidated. Mom's jewelry, car, and personal belongings were auctioned off. Watching my parents lose everything they'd built on stolen money felt like cosmic justice, but the best part was knowing I'd fought for it rather than just hoping karma would eventually intervene. Emma's art collection. The pieces she'd created and collected using my inheritance money were seized and sold at auction. The irony was perfect, artwork created with stolen money being sold to compensate the theft victim. Several pieces sold for decent amounts, but knowing they'd hang in other people's homes instead of Emma's fantasy gallery was deeply satisfying. The extended family reaction was mixed and telling. Some relatives who'd attacked me during the lawsuit quietly reached out with apologies once the criminal convictions made the truth undeniable. Others doubled down on defending my parents, insisting that family should come first regardless of the crimes involved. Jake's parents, Dad's own brother and sister-in-law, publicly cut ties with Dad and Mom, stating they couldn't support family members who'd systematically abused their daughter and committed federal crimes. The family split was permanent and bitter, exactly the kind of consequence my parents had assumed would only apply to me. Uncle Tom and Aunt Linda even invited me to family gatherings, explicitly stating I was welcome while my parents were not. The symbolic reversal was powerful. I'd gone from family scapegoat to welcomed member, while my parents became the pariahs. But the most unexpected development was hearing from other family members about their own experiences with my parents' manipulation. My cousin Michelle, Dad's niece, called me 6 months after the trial to share her own story. Sarah, I should have said something years ago, but your parents tried to get me to co-sign loans for Emma's art school. When I refused, they told everyone I was selfish and unsupportive. I started avoiding family gatherings because they made me feel guilty for not sacrificing my financial security for Emma's dreams. Similar stories emerged from multiple relatives. My parents had been running variations of the same manipulation game for years, identifying family members' resources and guilting them into supporting Emma's lifestyle. I wasn't their only victim, just their most successful long-term target. The criminal restitution process also revealed that my parents had been lying to Emma about their financial situation. She'd believed they were wealthy enough to support her lifestyle indefinitely, not realizing that every dollar she spent in Manhattan was stolen from me or borrowed against Dad's failing business. Emma's reaction to learning the truth about the family finances was typically self-centered. In a letter she sent from prison, which her lawyer later regretted allowing, she wrote, "I never asked you to sacrifice your college fund for my education. I never told them to take your inheritance for my apartment. If they made those choices without telling me, how is it my fault?" The letter perfectly encapsulated Emma's complete inability to take responsibility for her role in the family dynamic. Even facing federal prison time for participating in spending stolen money, she positioned herself as another victim of our parents' choices rather than acknowledging her active participation in a system that benefited her at my expense. But the letter also revealed something I'd suspected. Emma genuinely believed she deserved the special treatment she'd received. She didn't see the favoritism as unfair because she'd been raised to believe she was inherently more valuable than me. Reading her words, I felt the last remnants of sisterly guilt evaporate. Emma wasn't a victim of our parents' favoritism. She was its willing beneficiary and active participant. She'd known I was being treated unfairly and decided I deserved it. The realization was liberating. For 26 years, I'd made excuses for Emma's behavior, assuming she didn't understand how her privileges came at my expense. But she'd known exactly what was happening and felt entitled to every stolen dollar and every moment of special attention. The family I'd tried so desperately to earn love from had never seen me as worthy of love. They'd seen me as a resource to be exploited until I was used up. But now they were the ones facing consequences while I thrived in the life I'd built despite their sabotage. The collapse was complete, but my real victory was just beginning. 3 years later, I'm sitting in my new house in Portland, bought with a portion of my restitution money, watching the sunset through windows that actually belong to me, thinking about how dramatically life can change when you finally stop accepting unacceptable treatment. The Morrison family as I knew it no longer exists. Dad was released from federal prison last month and moved to a studio apartment across the country, working as a night security guard. The man who once owned a successful business and considered himself the family patriarch now lives alone, estranged from most relatives, surviving on minimum wage. Mom lives in a subsidized apartment in the same town where she once held social prominence. The woman who used to host elaborate dinner parties and judge other families' dysfunction now shops at food banks and avoids former friends who know about her criminal convictions. Emma served her full sentence and emerged to a world that had completely moved on without her. Her art career never recovered from the scandal. She works at a coffee shop in Denver now, living paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment, learning firsthand what financial independence actually requires. The poetic justice is perfect. All three of them are now experiencing the financial stress and social isolation they subjected me to for decades. But the difference is crucial. Their consequences came from their own criminal choices, while my struggles came from their systematic abuse. I feel no guilt about their downfalls. None whatsoever. The restitution money allowed me to finish my master's degree in nursing administration and buy my house, but the real treasure was the education I received about family dynamics and personal boundaries. Dr. Kim's testimony during the trial led to ongoing therapy that helped me understand how deeply the family manipulation had affected my self-worth and relationship patterns. Learning to believe I deserved love without earning it through service was harder than I expected. 26 years of conditioning doesn't disappear overnight. But with good therapy and distance from the toxic dynamics, I've discovered who Sarah Morrison actually is when she's not trying to win approval from people who are never going to give it. The woman I've become is someone my younger self couldn't have imagined. I date without feeling desperate for approval. I pursue friendships based on mutual respect rather than what I can provide others. I've even started painting. Something I always wanted to try but never felt worthy of creative expression in a family where Emma's art was the only creativity that mattered. My chosen family looks nothing like the biological lottery I was dealt, and it's infinitely healthier. Jake and I rebuilt our cousin relationship into something genuine and supportive. He visits Portland regularly, and we've developed traditions that feel more familial than anything I experienced growing up. Last Christmas, we made dinner together and exchanged thoughtful gifts while laughing about old Morrison family dysfunction that no longer has power to hurt us. Rebecca became more than my lawyer. She's now a close friend who checks in regularly and celebrates my victories. Having someone in your corner who sees your worth clearly is transformative when you've spent decades being gaslit about your value. David Kim and I maintain a professional relationship, but he's also become something like a mentor, helping me understand family psychology and manipulation tactics. His insights have been invaluable as I've worked to build healthy relationships and recognize red flags early. I've even connected with other survivors of family scapegoating through support groups and online communities. Sharing stories with people who understand the specific pain of being the family problem while watching golden children receive unconditional love has been healing in ways I didn't expect. But perhaps the most surprising development has been romantic. I met James at a medical conference 8 months ago. He's an emergency room physician who immediately noticed my tendency to over-explain myself and apologize for having needs. Instead of taking advantage of those patterns, he gently called them out and encouraged me to practice stating my preferences without justification. Dating someone who sees manipulation tactics clearly and refuses to participate in them has shown me what healthy relationship dynamics actually look like. James has never once suggested I should reconcile with my family because blood is thicker than water. He understands that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is permanently distance yourself from people who harm you. The Morrison relatives who sided with me during the trial have become my real extended family. Uncle Tom and Aunt Linda invite me to holidays where I'm celebrated rather than tolerated. Their children, who witnessed my mistreatment over the years, now include me in group chats and life events as a full family member. But the most meaningful change is internal. I no longer feel guilty for thriving while my biological family struggles. Their consequences are the direct result of their choices to commit crimes and abuse family members. My success is the result of refusing to accept unacceptable treatment and building a life based on my own values. The kidney situation resolved itself naturally. Emma received a kidney from a deceased donor after spending 2 years on the transplant list. The organ came from someone who'd made the selfless choice to be a donor, the kind of genuine gift my parents tried to force from me through legal coercion. Emma's transplant was successful medically, but her recovery has been complicated by continued substance abuse issues and her complete inability to take responsibility for the choices that led to organ failure. According to family members who still maintain contact, she's struggled with the immunosuppressive medications required after transplant and has had several complications that might have been avoided with better compliance. I feel no satisfaction in her medical struggles, but I also feel no guilt about refusing to donate my kidney to someone who'd helped orchestrate my financial and emotional abuse for years. My kidney remains healthy and functional, available for my own future medical needs or for donation to someone who hasn't built their life on exploiting my resources. The final legal chapter closed 6 months ago when my restitution payments were completed. $437,000, plus interest and penalties, money my parents will be paying back for the rest of their working lives. Every monthly payment is a reminder that financial abuse has consequences. But beyond the money, the real victory has been reclaiming my story. For 26 years, the Morrison family narrative painted me as the problem child, the jealous sister, the ungrateful daughter. Now the truth is documented in court records, media coverage, and criminal convictions. Anyone who wants to understand our family dynamic can read the facts rather than relying on my parents' manipulative storytelling. I don't need their acknowledgement or apology anymore. I have something better. A life built on my own terms, surrounded by people who value me for who I am rather than what I can provide them. The scared, desperate girl who once considered donating her kidney to earn family love has been replaced by a confident woman who knows her worth isn't determined by other people's treatment of her. Have you ever had to cut ties with family members who treated you more like a resource than a person? Have you experienced that moment when you realize someone's love was always conditional on what you could do for them? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments about standing up to family manipulation or discovering your worth after years of being undervalued. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life accounts of standing up to toxic family dynamics. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that it's okay to choose your own well-being over family expectations that were never fair to begin with. Thank you for listening to my journey from family scapegoat to empowered survivor. Remember, blood doesn't make family. Love, respect, and mutual support make family. choose the people who choose you back, and never apologize for refusing to be someone's unpaid sacrifice. Until next time, may your boundaries be strong and your chosen family be kind.